Well, I'm not getting out of here anytime soon. Oh well, might as well tell you about Fear and Hunger 2. Fear and Hunger 2 is brutal. It's also sadistic. Oh shit. And it's downright a fucking insane RPG game where death is not a possibility, it's an inevitability. Now, I tend to avoid RPGs, mostly because my gamer brain only allows me to play pew-pew shooters with ranking systems and overpriced gun skins. But something about getting my ass ripped apart in the first Fear and Hunger kind of struck a chord with me and managed to get me invested. So, after having experienced all that the first game, well, had to offer, I quickly came to learn from my ever so lovely viewers that there was a second game. So I thought I'd share it with all of you, both the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre shit that I experienced through playing Fear and Hunger 2. Termina, unlike the first game, takes place in a post-war version of Europe in the 40s. However, the first thing that stood out to me had to be the inclusion of 8 playable characters. Now, this is double the amount from the first game. While it might seem insignificant at first, it is super important. Now, each character offers a totally different experience as you play. Different stories, skills, and even special interactions. Now, for my playthrough, I decided to go for the Giga Chad himself, Marco, baby! Perfect. Now, he obviously bears a striking resemblance to Jotaro Kujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which has only made me want to play him even more. His story is that of a man fleeing from the mafia after having killed a mob boss for threatening his sister, who was also dating the mob boss. It's a little convoluted. As for the other characters, we have the most based of Osa. He's a yellow mage whose purpose is hidden in the shadows. Levi is an ex-child soldier with a heroin addiction. Wait, did I read that right? A heroin addiction. Honestly, what other game does this kind of shit? Then there is Marina, just an occult little girl. Karen, a nosy journalist. Abella, with the arguably biggest ass in the game. That is lore accurate, by the way, not my words. Olivia, a wheelchair-bound girl, but also a skilled botanist and incredibly good at spinning the block. And finally, Don, a doctor with the coolest looking eye patch in the entire game. Now, each of these characters have found themselves in the worst possible place in the world. Finland. Wait, sorry, it's actually an imaginary version of Germany from the mind of a Finnish guy, which actually sounds worse. Speaking of Germany, we find ourselves in a train. We are prompted to play the intro, and normally I would skip this, because I love getting straight into the gameplay, but... Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Yeah, I'm not skipping this shit again. Now, what is unique about the intro is that our choices will determine our skills. If we choose answers that point towards, for example, defense, we gain defensive skills, and so on and so forth. So, waking up, a creepy little girl runs past us, and we enter what looks like a wood workshop. Now, this entire sequence can be fully skipped if you don't play the intro, but it does give important game context. It teaches you combat, which I have a ton to say about that a bit later, but also it introduces you to this game's big bad guy, Prehevil.
Ah, there you are. Got you pulled out of that nasty place. You were going deep into that rabbit hole.
Yeah, he's kind of an asshole. And he's doing all this for the moon god Rear. They have gotten us, as well as 13 other contestants, stuck here in the city of Prehevil to compete in a pseudo-Hunger Games type of battle royale. So when we awaken, we find ourselves back on the train. Whew, okay, I'm awake. For a second there, I thought I was in Finland. What a fucking nightmare. Alright, I'm gonna grab this map on the table, which looks oddly similar to the one from Silent Hill 2. I mean, they look identical. Hello, everybody. My name is Borat. Very nice. Okay, for real though, who the fuck are you guys? Okay, so this is a massive and important change. You see, in the first Fear and Hunger, your story felt kind of like its own separate adventure compared to the other 3 characters, whereas in Termina, all the contestants can be met and interacted with almost at the beginning of the game, and it's kind of a necessity to do so. See, interacting with the others becomes a big part of the game's journey and gameplay loop, and if you don't interact with them, it kind of makes it impossible to finish the game. We have the option of introducing ourselves to the others, or we can just run the fuck away right off the get-go. Whatever choice you make will depend on how you wish to play the game. Alright, guys, I am out of here. Bye-bye. Okay, right. I got something quite important to say here. Now, I had a really hard time enjoying this game from the start. You see, in Fear and Hunger 1, the game just let you loose and gave you really only 2 directions to go in. And I'm not even kidding when I say this, but getting my ass railed by the guard in the first game of the dungeon really is what made me want to keep playing the game further. But with Fear and Hunger 2, the game is almost 3 times the size of the first one, so I felt overwhelmed by the size of everything, including the size of the dick. The mere fact that there were just so many characters, directions to go in, and things to find made it hard for me to grasp or really fully get into the game. And with Termina, I struggled to find that. I'm the type of gamer where I almost need a direction or path to follow, or else I will just feel lost. That was until I made a new save file one night and finally decided to explore beyond the train. And holy shit, did things escalate quickly. Now, I follow a man named Tanaka into the forest. He's just an average Japanese salaryman. Together, we find a bunch of strung-up corpses. Very casual. I even get jump-scared by a falling bucket. But the one thing that made me want to keep playing was the encounter with the Woodsman. Now, when I first ran across him, I watched as he quite literally chopped off a villager's head. So, with no idea what to do, I saw a hole, or a well, and it prompted me to jump down. So, that's what I did, but then I remembered the last time I jumped into a hole, yeah, it didn't really go that well. Now, as I sat in this endless pit of literal shit, I kept trying to press or do anything, but I know from the first game that it won't do nothing. Or at least I thought so until I got a prompt to yell for help. I thought maybe you could do something or nothing until we hear some footsteps.
Hello.
Holy shit, it's Tanaka. This caught me off guard so hard. You see, in the first game, no one could come to your rescue. You were doomed to die in the toilet on your own. But here, my lovely Japanese salaryman came to my rescue. Is that Tanaka's dismembered head? And a rope? I climbed out, and it's the Woodsman. He sent the rope down. Holy shit. You do not understand how this moment is what cemented my love for the second game. But the game fully subverted my expectations. Instead of being saved by one of the passengers, I got saved by the man that caused me to end up here in the first place. This was the point which made me want to keep playing and get invested. Something about how the game messed with my perceptions and ideas of it just made me want to keep enjoying it. The Woodsman is also an interesting guy. Now, if you manage to kill him and you get his keys, you can check his basement inside of his home. And maybe you shouldn't kill the guy, given he saved us, but that's besides the point. Here you can uncover a blood-splattered wall and writings on it, as well as the body of the Woodsman's wife. Now, what we learn from this information and the letter on the man himself is that apparently his goat, named Black Caleb, apparently... Wait, I need a second before I read this. His goat... his wife. Turns out he wasn't a good enough lover, so his wife decided to become a literal goat diddler. Only Fear and Hunger can make me invested in a story about a wife cheating on her husband with a goat. It's just so bizarre, yet that is what makes it entertaining. It is actually kind of similar to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, my favorite anime and manga series. The weird shit and goofy characters in that show and manga is what makes it so memorable and fun to watch. Without those elements, it would just be yet another shonen series with little to no heart or soul. Speaking of the goat, Black Caleb of course being his name, you can actually recruit him. To do this, you just gotta go into the basement of the house and draw a symbol for the god Rear on the ritual circle. Doing so, you'll be able to recruit him when you go back outside. But when you do draw this circle, you'll also enter an alternate world. Now, I'll talk about these other locations a little bit later, but when you're inside of here, you can meet a man in black. It is speculated that the goat and the man in black are basically the same person, individual, entity, whatever you want to call them, and given the fact that he's a goat, it could imply that he is a pseudo-devil in the world of Fear and Hunger. So, if I instead didn't jump into the big well and just ran past the Woodsman, I could head towards the western woods and keeping Tanaka alive for now, and instead finding my first party member, Abella.
You there. You like video games? You like watching video essays? You should subscribe. And while you're at it, join our Discord. If you don't, well, who knows what might happen.
Where was I? Oh, right, Abella. She's a skilled technician and has, according to the in-game lore, the thickest bunda. And together with her ass, we can enter a bunker called Tunnel 7. Now, the party system where you have other characters join you, like Abella in this case, is great in the game, but it does come with a downside. The more members you have, the more easy it is for enemies to actually grab you and attack you because your party is larger, and because it's larger, you also are more likely to be hit when you're trying to avoid them. Inside, we find a hat, which looks oddly similar to Tanaka. Oh my god, again! Brother, Tanaka can just not catch a bloody break. No matter what you do, he seems to get killed, this time by needles. But before we talk about Needles himself, notice how we saw Tanaka's hat right before we found him being killed. Now, this is a great way for the game to do world building and sort of immersion. The hat is just so recognizable on Tanaka that its placement felt so strange, but the game loves doing this, leaving small hints or indications of what's to come without making it blatantly obvious. Now, as for the guy that killed him, his name is Needles. He's based on Art the Clown from the Terrifier franchise. Now, Needles can be really hard to beat, and even if we lock him away for the first time around, he will escape, so killing him early on is the best thing to do. And if we search his body, we can find a month's supply of heroin. Yeah, more about that in a bit. Now, after leaving the Tunnel 7, we can instead head towards the Old Town, where we can uncover quite a few things. On the way, also encountering the dogs from the first game, or the hounds. This time, however, they're missing their heads, which is a little bit strange, but they do less damage, so that's great. Reaching Old Town, we encounter, well, some interesting people. The villagers are lore accurate to daily life in Frankfurt, Germany, and where we also get our first taste of combat. Now, I want to say, combat is something in Fear and Hunger which is sort of meant to be avoided. It's mostly because, unlike other RPGs where you gain experience and new items, in Fear and Hunger, there is nothing gained from actually killing enemies or battling. So in the first game, it's best to avoid them. However, that's not the case in Fear and Hunger 2. In Termina, however, I quickly learned that progress can only be done through combat. See, Termina introduces the headshot mechanic. Oh yeah, baby. By chopping off the heads of your enemies and sacrificing them to the old gods, you gain what's called soul shards. Now, these can then in turn be used to upgrade or unlock skills for your character on the Hexen table. Again, the game does a great job of subverting my expectations without making it too jarring and uncomfortable to enjoy. But I love the combat in this game, and mostly because of the targeting of different body parts. Instead of just going for an entire enemy, like in, let's say, Pokemon, here you get to target individual body parts, and you got to take them out one by one carefully and strategizing to figure out what is the weakest part on the enemy. And this is what I love about the game. Normally, I'm not the type of person to play RPGs much because I think they're tedious and boring, but because of the trial and error and constantly weird shit happening in this game, it keeps me invested. So eventually, after fighting through a bunch of Europeans, I end up with this pig mask guy, and I shit you not, if you talk to him in battle, you can mock him, and this will cause him to die. What's wrong, bro? Nice balls. Guys with pig masks don't get hot Latinas. Dude, you look like you're from Detroit. So one thing you can observe while walking around in Old Town is that there's these, I guess, coffins all over the place, and if you interact with them, you can knock on them. However, on the lowest difficulty, which is what I was playing on, you don't really get any interactions. However, if you play on higher difficulties, something will pop out of them, that being the death masks. Now, these guys are a chase enemy. Think like Mr. X, or I guess a little bit like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2. Basically, it's an enemy that chases after you. They have giant blades, and death masks are multiple. They are extremely difficult to defeat and could end your runs in a single battle, but it doesn't end there. If we keep walking around, we can enter a shop, which we were not supposed to enter just yet because apparently it's too early and he won't be opening until tomorrow. So we can leave the shop with the weird bandaged guy who's holding what seems like a baby. I'm not going to question it too much. Instead, we go inside of a house where we find our first bed to lay in. Now, of course, I take the opportunity to have myself a nap, but I do remember something important. You see, in the first Fear and Hunger, when you tried to save your game, you had to do a coin flip. And this coin flip would result in either you going to sleep and saving your game, or option number 2 was you may or may not run into an enemy. depending on if you killed everyone on the floor you were on. And this would be very impactful because this could end your entire run just by trying to save your game. It made the literal concept of saving your progress a 50-50 gamble, which is kind of interesting because it adds, like I've said before, a little bit of edge to the actual experience of the game, which I'm fine with, but it doesn't end there. You see, in Termina, they instead let you save your game whenever you want to. There is no coin flip. But instead, we are transported to the same place we first met Prehevil. Now, first of all, his name is literally just a swear word in Finnish, by the way. It's a word I've heard many times from drunk Finnish men in Sweden on the buses. But that's besides the point. He basically works for the moon god Rear, who, again, looks oddly similar to the moon from Majora's Mask. And that's because this game, instead of having a 50-50 coin flip, instead has a 3-day limit. What I mean by this is that you only have 3 days, just like in Majora's Mask, to actually finish the game. And every time you save, you are progressing those days forward. In total, you can only save like 7 to 8 times because the game works in a day, night, and kind of morning cycle. So you have basically like 3 sets during the day where you can save. So every day, out of a total 3, you can save 3 times. This is pretty nuts because it keeps you constantly on the edge. But you might think to yourself, well, I'll simply just not save my game. What's going to happen? Well, here's the thing. To balance it out, you literally cannot make progress in the entire game if you do not save at least a few times. An example, you know that shopkeeper we just spoke about? Well, the reason he will not sell us anything is because he literally will not open until the next day. So you need to save like 2 or 3 times so the next day starts to roll over, and then he will let you purchase items. This is how the game does a really good job of balancing the saving versus you actually doing things in the world. It forces you to save, even if you don't want to. So even if you want to do a clean singular run, you're gonna have a struggle, except if you're playing specifically the most hardest difficulty, the masochism mode. Because when you play that one, well, then it's much easier because there is no saving in that version. You gain nothing from saving your game. You have to beat it in a singular run. By the way, I did mention a little bit of Majora's Mask, but you can clearly see the influence here. The giant moon, the 3-day cycle, it's all there. I mean, shit, even like the land specifically in Majora's Mask is called Termina. So he's using the exact same naming scheme in this game. It is great, and you can definitely tell that Miro, the creator of Fear and Hunger, loves to take influences from different sorts of media, whether it's manga, anime, other video games, movies, all sorts of stuff to use as inspiration for his game. And I think it's the best when you can do that sort of stuff, where it doesn't feel like a copy, but rather it's fully inspired by it. Like Termina here, Fear and Hunger 2 feels like its own product and not just a byproduct or a copy of specifically Majora's Mask. Instead, it's its own experience. As we return back to the old town, our further exploration can garner us a few new things. First of all, we can find a house with yet another shitty jump scare, but also something brand new that has been introduced in this game. America's favorite pastime, guns, baby! And the thing that was the wildest to me is that the guns can't just be used during battle, but in the overworld, you're actually able to equip a weapon and fire off bullets on enemies that are charging at you. This is a sick mechanic, but it has a bit of a drawback to balance it out. If you run out of bullets while shooting an enemy when they reach you, the gun you used will still be on you, but you won't be able to do anything since the weapon is out of ammo during combat. It's a good way to keep the game balanced and make sure that the, well, ranged guns are not overpowered. Also, one of the most effective weapons in the game is actually glass shards. By picking up glass that's crushed on the floor, you can throw it at enemies' faces to lower their accuracy, which is great. Another mechanic that I noticed was added in the game, which never appeared in the first one, is a run mechanic. This one uses a stamina bar, and if you hold shift, you can run away from enemies. This is necessary given the speed increase that certain enemies also have in this game, so you kind of need to use this in some of those tight corners and hallways to make sure you are able to traverse around them. Now, our exploration eventually leads us down into a sketchy basement. Now, most of these look like makeshift bomb shelters that would have been used during World War II. Also, remember all those severed heads we casually chopped off? Well, this is where we can exchange them for some sweet loot. We get soul shards in return, which can be used to unlock lovely things in the hexen table. Speaking of which, there are only 2 ways to even use the hexen table. One is to go to sleep and use the hexen table at Prehevil Tower, and the other is the 2 hexen tables that are hidden somewhere in the city of Prehevil, which we will find eventually. However, the abilities that you have on offer are some of the wildest and hands down funniest shit you'll ever see.
I'm looking for the skills, right?
The one thing I read, blood sacrifice. I'm like, okay, you know what? I can understand that. Smash shit, brother. What am I reading? That's an actual, dude, no joke. That's an actual ability. Oh my,
I'm not going to say much more about it. I won't say it out loud, but they have literally custom-made animations for each of the characters if you unlock this skill. It is crazy. Another thing we find in the basement is that kid Levi from earlier. He seems to be stressed out and will run away if we try to talk to him. And the interesting part here is that if we don't encounter him in this exact moment in this location, he won't show up later for us to possibly recruit him. This is one of the most interesting elements of the game. You have to sort of be very careful with how and when you do things to make sure you can see certain events take place, which does add to the replayability of the game. Reaching the slums of the city, it looks like most of the residents here have had a little bit too much rakia the night before, so they all looked fucked up. A bunch of these people have disfigured faces, and some of them can even attack us, but it's best to avoid these guys in particular as they are infected. Inside of one of the huts, an old man tells us that these people have been Moonscorched, probably due to the moon god's influence. Now, this causes mutations and disfigurement of the humans, as well as a loss of sanity. Apparently, all the homeless and downtrodden people were pushed into the slums by the Woodsman, as well as one of the priests. We are actually offered here the option of killing them and bringing back their heads. I did try doing this once, but in doing so, I encountered the Woodsman, and if he gets to the point where he can use the coin flip attack, because yes, coin flips are still in the game, they're only really used on chests and during battles, but if he does use it, he throws literally his schlong at us. Abella is grabbed by a bony grasp of an appendage. Violently, the thing thrusts its tentacles down the throat. Cold tendril. Yo, daddy, calm down. Jeez. And it ended up with Abella having a giant face hugger from Alien stuck on her face. So it's best avoided and just not really worth doing this little side quest for him. Instead, while on the search for the priest, which was the second person he wanted, I ended up entering the mayor's mansion. Now, I was told by the homeless guy that apparently a new mayor was in charge ever since the Bremen army, which is pseudo-Germany in this case, took over the town of Prehevil. While here we can find the priest. Now, he isn't too hard to defeat, and this particular priest's name is Father Oscar, and clearly the guy has seen some better days. I mean, look at his head. It's best to cut his limbs off fast before he can use his magic spells, because those can do immense damage and easily ruin your entire run, but also get rid of many limbs on your body. And if you by any chance happen to die to this guy, you'll also find yourself with your legs chopped off, hung up in the old town square while the villagers do some ritual dances around you. Man, I feel like Polnareff from Part 5. However, there is an interesting thing that can happen if you get stuck here. August, one of the coolest characters in Termina, can show up. Now, this dude is someone that we really cannot play as, but we do run across him many times in the game, and each time, he'll do some badass shit like jumping across buildings or killing random stuff. However, in this case, he gets us down from there and patches us up before running away. And since our legs are gone, this is basically a game over. So just make sure that when you do go into the battle with the priest, just make sure you are prepared. Exploring the rest of the mayor's mansion, you can find a bed. And remember, beds are used for saving, but they also progress the days forward. And depending on what your character you're playing as, there is a chance you may run across the most vile guy in this entire game, Caligura. Now, this dude is one of the 14 contestants, and he is a mobster. He is just hands down constantly throughout the entire game doing horrible shit. He will kill other contestants just blatantly. If you try to sleep in the bed as Abella, he will try to on her.
Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantical.
And just so much other worse shit. Now, I had the pleasure of avoiding any encounters with him on my main runs, but he can make himself present quite a few times through your gameplay. And if you do run across him, it's best to just kill the guy, or else he can start trouble down the road. Instead, we are going to be encountering the mayor. Now, to encounter him, we need to make sure the day has progressed to the evening. So, to do this, I just left and ran back all the way to the train and slept there and then returned to the mansion, where I encounter his butler.
Who's this? Good afternoon, mister. From what I understand, you're a newcomer to this town, no? We've got a new mayor to the old town. I'm sure he's thrilled to start his business immediately by meeting the newcomers. Okay, please, he's waiting at the dining room. Oh, shit.
And he will be inside the kitchen having a meal. The guy is grotesque, but his attire resembles that of Henrik, which we encountered at the train from the start. Now, there are really only two ways things can go here. We can answer the questions he gives us incorrectly, and this will initiate a battle sequence against him, which, to be honest, is not worth it. The guy has, it's too powerful, man, okay? You can't win. So it's better to just answer his questions correctly, which, if it's done, will instead cause him to just hand you the first key you need to enter
the center of Prehevil. So, with the key in hand, we can now hunt for the second one. And this one can be found all the way back to Tunnel 7. This is, of course, where we fought Needles. Speaking of Needles, by the way, a little bit of a side note, but if you didn't actually kill him just yet, if you encounter him here for the first time after doing all the other stuff we've done so far, he'll be wearing Tanaka's hat, which I find to be the most hilarious thing ever. Poor Tanaka got killed, and the man even stole his hat. It is ridiculous. So, all we need is some gasoline to activate an elevator. Now, this will lead us down deeper. And that same girl from the start of the game will creepily walk by once more as butterflies linger where she steps. Now, these are used in-game to indicate if that you're going in the right direction. The butterflies almost show you the path. And at the end, we will find a soldier's corpse, which holds the second key, as well as a soldier's letter talking about some bizarre shit happening around here. The last thing we uncover is a giant machine called a telectroscope. There are 3 of these spread out through the city of Prehevil, and we can learn this later when we pick up a note which highlights all of these on the map for us. To get to each 3 of these is a massive task, but it's necessary if you wish to get the game's hardest ending, which is known as Ending A, which is the one I actually ended up getting. Isn't that crazy? Oh boy. There is also a ritual circle right below the telectroscope. If we touch it, we will find ourselves in the other world. This is a dark and twisted version of Prehevil and is directly inspired by the other world from Silent Hill. Here we'll be swamped and just swarmed by the Rontial. These things are just strange monsters with large pendulum-looking arms, and their body is just stitched pieces together. Now, if we escape from them, we can exit the other world and return to the front gate once more. So, now that we have both those keys, we can enter inside of Prehevil's main streets. Now, this is where a large majority of your time will be spent in the game. The streets will be loaded with foes and all kinds of weird stuff happening. I check out the restaurant first because I want a little bit of pasta, but unfortunately they don't fucking have it. So instead, we're gonna go downstairs where we will find Levi. Well, here's the thing. We have the option of actually recruiting him into our party, but the only way to do this is on this particular day and specifically using heroin. I'm not even kidding. I mean, we could also just kill him for the other endings, you know. I mean, it's always doable. Yeah, you see, Levi is and was a child soldier from a very young age, and his way of coping with the traumas of his past was to get, well, higher than a kite and start making clouds like Snoop Dogg. So the only way to recruit him is by having some heroin on hand. Lucky me, I did have some from Needles from way earlier in the run. So if we hand these his way, he will join up with us and keep exploring. And due to being a soldier, he is very skilled with any gun or ranged weapons that we may encounter. One of the things we will run across together is none else than Pocket Cat. Now, this is a terrifying creature which already appeared in the first Fear and Hunger, and is somehow still around now many years later. It beats the shit out of someone inside of its bag, and then we can spend some time talking philosophically before Pocket Cat offers us to buy a bunch of different items, which could come in handy, in exchange for heads? Actually, specifically contestant heads, but it's not as bad as what he wanted in the first game. With nothing to offer him, we leave, and I noticed that my entire squad is hungry, which is a good time to bring up the game's 3 different systems. You see, first there is your health. This determines if you're still alive or not, as reaching 0 means you get sent to the Shadow Realm. As for your hunger and sanity, these can affect how you function and perform. For example, if you get way too hungry, you may lose the ability to use your legs. And if your sanity goes too low, you might start sounding like Joe Biden. So to keep each of these things on the up and up, it's best to drink some vodka and do some hard drugs with the boys. The rest of the city has so much to offer. For one, there's quite a few different enemy types, there's a few stores, and there's these guys called Bobbies, which are basically Moonscorched police officers with multiple arms and batons so they can beat the shit out of everyone. Funny thing about them, though, is if you kill one of them, you actually need to kick them on the ground to fully end their life. I wonder if this is meant to have some strange undertones, huh? But yeah, finally they actually made the kicking mechanic from the first game have a use case. Because I remember I was able to always kick corpses in the first Fear and Hunger, but it just didn't do shit. Now there actually is a use case for it because it's the only way to kill off one of these bobbies. There's also these weird dog monsters which will haunt us, as well as the Inquisitors, which are just fucking annoying with their little jingle bells. But the weirdest thing I found was inside one of the clothing stores where we can encounter something strange. It's a giant pile of clothes. Clothes, really? Okay. Well, this is an enemy which can be faced off against. It's similar to the human Hydra from the first game. It can't do anything to you as, well, basically it can't kill you, but you can't kill it unless you want to stand here for a few hours since it has like literally 1,000,000 health. I'm not even exaggerating. But this enemy does carry some significance. It's actually based on a real-life fear that the creator of the game, Miro, has of specifically, I'm not even kidding, white button-down shirts. Apparently, he saw a giant obelisk art piece of that in his childhood, which terrified him, so that became a trauma, and he put it inside of the game. This would explain why this particular enemy only removes your sanity rather than doing any physical damage. I can kind of relate to this because I have an irrational fear of buttons and metal, so don't question it, it's just strange. All right, well, back to the streets I go, where I belong. When you move around the city, there's actually these manhole covers that you can use to enter into the sewer system of Prehevil. By far, this is one of my least favorite places to explore, just in general. For one, it contains a ton of enemies. You have the neighbors, which wear white button-down shirts. Huh, interesting. And they look just like the Slurper enemies from Silent Hill 3. They are easy to beat, but there are just so many of them that you end up wasting a lot of health just trying to get through them. The tunnel does also contain the game's hardest puzzle to solve without a guide, which I should also mention, this game is close to impossible to beat without looking things up. And I don't actually mind that. Having to look things up and having certain stuff feel almost hidden or like an urban legend, which only a few Reddit posts could explain, actually reminded me of my childhood, when I got my hands on my first ever Game Boy with Pokemon Ruby version. I always remember struggling and getting stuck due to my lack of English knowledge at the time, and also, I was just a dumb kid, okay? But I never forgot this sort of like story I would hear in school, and these special and rare Pokemon which you could find. And this one kid showed me a YouTube video for the first time, and it was just of a guy doing a strange puzzle to unlock and access one of the 3 Reggies. And this brought this crazy amazement into my eyes and my mind. I just couldn't believe that this secret stuff existed, and there are people on the internet that explain it. And I felt that same joy of discovery whenever I had to look things up for Termina. Learning from others how to do things and then realizing, oh my god, that's how it works? It was such a euphoric moment for me. So, using a guide, we can solve the sewer puzzle, and this actually gains us access to the second location for the second telectroscope. But before we get to it, we run across an old face. Out of the darkness, a creature approaches. When it finally reaches us, it's Moonless! Oh my god, this is one of the best doggies ever, okay? She's one of the monsters you can recruit in Fear and Hunger 1. She has basically just gotten larger, and there is something strange though. She has 2 weapons from Fear and Hunger stuck in her back. One of them is Miasma, and the other one is Black Steel, another sword from the first game. So we can actually use this opportunity to steal these swords if we want to. Either way, this battle can be hard as you need to heal a ton of times, but eventually you will be saved by August, the Mega Chad, because he will show up and stop the battle, telling us that Moonless is apparently a family friend of his, which would imply that he knows a lot more about, I guess, the first game than he's letting on. So, with that sorted, we can head down to the bottom of the basement. Here we can find the another telectroscope activated, and oh my dear lord. Is that Tanaka? Holy shit, man. He's seen better days. He looks a little fucked up, a little terrifying. But at first, I thought he was okay. But as he turns around, it is Tanaka's doppelganger. It's a copy of him. We encountered another one of these doppelgangers back in the sewers, which I didn't show you, but I can show you now. And that one was specifically of Levi. It's almost like somebody's trying to clone and create fake versions of real humans, but they're not really the best at making them look, you know, actually human. They look a little fucked up, a little uncanny. So either way, we can battle and take Tanaka out relatively easily, which doesn't really garner us anything. All right, baby, we're back to the surface. The only thing we need now is one more telectroscope. So, yep, let's keep searching the town for some survivors. There's a strange noise from one of the shopping malls. Sounds like screams. So I go to the roof where I see this shit, and it's, yeah, a little bit disturbing to say the least. As we explore, we run across Dr. Keffer's store. The guy is a bit of a shitheel, but if we check the back of his store, there is a magic lamp. Now, I, of course, didn't really think much of it and pressed the rub it button. Little did I know that giving a hand job to a magic lamp would summon an evil genie that easily killed my entire party. So instead, we're just gonna reverse back and buy some stuff from Dr. Keffer with some of the shillings we can spare. So, if we now head towards the east side of Prehevil, we will discover and find the church. Before we enter it, we do also see a giant creature just stabbing one of the bobbies. As we enter it, it's a church in the honor of Almir, one of the old gods. And here we can discover the second element of Fear and Hunger, the hunt for the effigies. You see, the telectroscopes are only one part and one thing needed for ending A, but if you wish to get any of the other two endings, you instead need to find these strange effigies that are spread around the city. Then taking them back and placing them here on the altar in the church is what you need to do. Also, one of the effigies is that of a man giving fellatio. Alright then. Exploring this place, we can find a few notes. One of them, for example, is from one of the workers that was repairing the church. He apparently hid away one of his bolt cutters in the church because some kids were stealing his stuff. And if we find those bolt cutters underneath some rocks, we can climb up to the top of the church, and along the way, we also have to try to avoid these big monsters called Pillar Men. A great name, by the way, as it's directly taken from the 4 villains of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2 called Battle Tendencies. Basically, that series and that specific part features these 4 really buff dudes that are referred to as the Pillar Men. They're amazing. So if we use the bolt cutters on the chandelier, it will crash and open the ground up, allowing smooth access into the church's basement. But we do find these weird things though. For example, the first effigy, the martyr one, but it also holds a new enemy type. It's Gary from SpongeBob. That is not even a joke, by the way. It's literally based on Dream Gary, which is basically looks identical to this creature. Its name in Termina is Crimson Father, and loads of them will be roaming around the place. And when you basically defeat one in battle, the little version of him will just crawl away, just like Gary does in SpongeBob. We can also use one of the ritual circles here to enter the other world, but this version of the other world is strange. There are lumps of clay which we can interact with and shape into ourselves, which is a peak narcissism, baby. However, something dark does hide in this room. As we approach an altar, a girl can be spotted. We have seen her before. See, I had at one point returned earlier to the train to just check some things out.
Holy shit, who the hell was that?
Her name is Samari, and her story is quite grim. She is madly in love with Marina, the occult girl which we can play as, but also who we met in the train. She's one of her classmates apparently, and Samari even murdered Marina's father because she thought that he was treating her poorly. So, when we saw her on the train, it was a moment of her stalking Marina. So, when we confront her, she will start spouting nonsense before we face her in combat. This is her Moonscorched form, called dysmorphia, most likely referring to her potentially suffering from body dysmorphia. It's a mental illness specifically involving obsessive focus on a perceived flaw in one's appearance. So it's just somebody finding flaws in the way they look and constantly obsessing about that, stressing about that, and even hurting themselves over that. Now, this battle is difficult, as dysmorphia can summon 2 creatures that will do extra damage each turn if they aren't killed off. However, what exactly causes her to turn into this creature, I don't know. Which I guess is another great time to bring up the element of Moonscorched forms. You see, everyone and every character that you play as, or NPC that's part of the contestants, can receive a Moonscorched form in the game. Usually this happens by the 3rd day of playing, and you will start encountering far more NPCs that have become Moonscorched. Now, this disease is basically a form of punishment by the moon god Rear, and this is towards people that don't want to take part in the Termina festival who he invited. So you might wonder, what exactly does Rear want us to do in this festival? Well, it seems like he wants us to kill the other contestants. That is the purpose of the festival. It's basically a way for him to find one human to attain the same levels of godhood that he has, or at least that's the implication. And if anyone is still alive by the 3rd day, that would imply that they have avoided killing others, so they start going and getting Moonscorched. I even tried going to the tower where Pericles awaits for us once, but if you try to enter it before killing everyone else, your party members will become Moonscorched out of nowhere and you need to kill them all anyways. So, in Samari's case, she gets defeated by us, and we do lose, some limbs in the process, but we do gain her soul. Her particular soul unlocks 2 skills in the Hexen table, the Blood Sacrifice and Master. Oh my god. Alright, besides that, this again shows how the game decided to very much focus on battles far more than the first one. You can literally not complete the game unless you kill others. It's a large part of the gameplay loop, and it's the only method to unlock more abilities on the Hexen, as well as to get the other 2 endings in the game besides ending A. Finally, we can leave the church to find the other 2 effigies, as well as the last telectroscope that we need So we head towards the west. First, we have a look-see inside of the orphanage, which, by the way, is arguably the creepiest location in the game. The music here is creepy, and it features these shadowy figures, a ghost-like monster resembling a little girl. They even leave handprints on the walls in the areas which they roam, which is a great touch of environmental storytelling, showing us that there are these ghosts leaving haunting reminders of their presence. A mechanic from the first game also makes a return. If you don't pay good attention to the floorboards, you may just be faced by a coin flip, which, if lost, because I have fucking shitty luck, will result in you dropping down into the basement, where cherubs, which are these creepy little monsters, will be waiting for you. These guys are most likely Moonscorched orphans, which is just a tad bit fucking disturbing. I mean, bro, this game has so many messed up enemies. I'm not gonna lie, this really did catch me off guard. The whole orphanage was just bizarre. It was very creepy and odd, and the fact that the coin flip mechanic suddenly appeared again literally gave me a real-life fucking jump scare and whiplash, because I could not believe that they were forcing me to do this shit again. But if we keep exploring and make it to the top floors, we'll find a hexen table, which we can use outside of Perkele's Tower, which is only one of 2 locations for this, which is fantastic. But what remains in the orphanage at this point is the battle against Father Hugo. This guy is just weird, okay? I don't know if perhaps he may have done some bizarre stuff to the orphans, but books and notes describe him as being a renowned man within the realm of the occult, as he has a massive fascination and strange interpretations of the gods of old, as well as just really wanting to go to the city of Mahaber from Fear and Hunger 1. If we battle the dude, the first phase is relatively easy, but holy shit, the man just decided to let it all hang out there in the second phase. He just goes full naked, and he will cast fire spells which can burn us, and if we defeat him somehow, the entire room will now be scorched, which again is a really cool detail that's added in. Like, he didn't need to add in this element, but it shows that we really did do this battle here, and it wasn't just something in our imagination. With him being killed now, we gain access to the Headmaster Key, which can be used in the orphanage's courtyard to access the area which contains the second effigy as well as a bunch of enemies. This time it's the hunger effigy, which to me could imply that perhaps these orphans constantly suffered from hunger and mistreatment from Father Hugo and the other priests that ran the orphanage. Once again, I'm back on the streets and we need to find 2 more things. First, we check out the Prehevil Bop. This is a bar of sorts where you can genuinely just take a moment to relax for a bit. Your party members will spread out, and it's just a perfect place to just take a little bit of a chill pill. You can also find a secret speakeasy. Now, these were real places which were used to serve alcohol during Prohibition, which is when all forms of alcohol were banned in the 1920s to the 1930s in the United States. The speakeasy is also where we can find the map that shows us the location of all the effigies and telectroscope, which we needed much earlier. There's also a ritual circle here, and if we had some chalk, which we found earlier, we can draw, well, different ritual circles. In my case, I drew one of the God of Fear and Hunger, which, funny enough, was created by us, the players, way back in the first game. Now, this specific god's ritual circle allows us to save our game without having to use a bed or a rare book of enlightenment. So the game does offer opportunities for you to save your game without actually progressing days forward, which is great. Our next goal is the apartment complex inside of Prehevil. Once you enter this location, you're fucking stuck, which is something I didn't even know as I entered, so yeah. The apartment is really interesting, and it's mostly because there is a puzzle which you need to solve inside of it. Now, to do this puzzle, we can check out a television that is upstairs. There will be a news broadcast by none else than Karen, the news reporter that we ran across at the start of the game. She speaks of a man that murdered a bunch of people in the apartments, and the names she mentions are also the exact rooms we should check out. So, if we then push a giant horse head into one of the rooms and find the killer's diary, it will tell us exactly what order the codes are supposed to be in. And using that, we can go downstairs and type in the code into a washing machine. And then we can enter it. See, the bottom of the washing machine leads us to another version of the Otherworld again. This was by far the hardest place to traverse, mostly because it's just filled with a ton of neighbor enemies, which we have to keep avoiding constantly. But if we manage to skirt around them, we can eventually find the final effigy. It's the fellatio one, with obviously the least subtle naming scheme ever. So having the last effigy, this actually opens up the apartments and we can now leave if we want to. So only one thing remains before we use the effigies. We now have to find the third and final telectroscope. This one is found inside of the deep woods. This location can be accessed very early on if you have 2 items. that being one of the books, as well as some chalk to draw a ritual circle. I took the long way around, which caused me to have to run all the way past a bunch of crazed police officers, and oh hey, is that Karen? Seems she has had her fill of bizarre stuff for now, so she joins our party. We can then together proceed to the deep woods. Now, this place is my least favorite area, mostly because I just was a bit lost, and it's confusing as shit walking around here and traversing. And also because there's these annoying owl cultists that will shoot poison darts at you from the shadows, as well as the woods containing the game's hardest enemy, the centaur. Now, this thing will destroy you if it catches you. It's best avoided. You don't even need to battle it. You just need to get away from it because it is one-shotting you every time. And because it's so fast as well, it can be a little bit of a hassle dodging it. To find the last electroscope, we need to avoid these massive flesh monsters and also kill the cousin of Needles, that being Stitches. Now, this bitch is a monster consisting of multiple humans sewn together into one grotesque creature. She can be as difficult as Needles, and as for her design, she's seemingly based on the movie Stitches. Not very creative, but yeah. Basically, it's a horror movie from 2012, but the worst thing is, if she kills us in battle, she has a special scene where we can witness her stitching us together, just like in the movie Human Centipede. I won't elaborate further. But if we activate the elevator using some of the gasoline and we also kill her, we can reach the final telectroscope as well as finding Osa. Now, I'm gonna tell you right now, please play this game yourself and play as Osa, because this guy has the most unique story of anyone, and a playthrough as him is almost a must. But since our party is full, he can't join us, which is unfortunate. So instead, we activate the last telectroscope and make our escape out of the deep woods. Oh, and also I forgot to mention, you guys remember Olivia Haas, the girl in the wheelchair? Well, guess what? In the forest, we can see her, but she's running around with her legs fully functioning, which was quite something to behold, to say the least. Now, this is where the game allows us to choose two different paths in terms of what we want to do. If we have the 3 telectroscopes activated, as well as the 3 effigies sorted out, we can go for ending A. But for endings C and B, we would need to kill all the other contestants first. In my case, I aimed for ending A, so that's what I will show you today. But we will talk a bit about the endings B and C at the end of the video as well. First of all, we reach the church again. We will then place the last 2 effigies and open up the basement once more. Down here, the game does this lovely thing of having 2 different paths you can choose, but basically, either path you go in will contain enemies, so you sort of have to determine which side is easier to beat and what will your team be better against. Exiting, we'll find ourselves in the Mausoleum Alley, where a new enemy called Belland will show up. Okay, this is getting out of hand at this point. Entering the altar of the one god, we'll find a dead woman, as well as encounter the coolest fuck character, Rancid the Sergal.
Mataneko Kone Magnificent. That is my name. The last name you'll hear before the heads start to roll. My blood is rushing wild!
Now, we've seen him a few times before when we reached the church the first time, but his battle is a wild one. He is really difficult, but if defeated, he will survive and then drop a spear before running away like a scared little shit. What I love about Rancid though is his really cool design, because it's based off of the web manga called Villas, which features a similar looking creature. Reaching an altar right before the big tower, we can encounter a strange scene. It's the Kaiser. This guy was first spotted by us early on when we entered the city of Prehevil and looks just like the King in Yellow from Fear and Hunger 1, or for those of you that remember, this would most likely be Legard, the man that wished to attain godly ascension.
Kaiser, do you even know why this bullet has your name written on it?
You're one of my officials, Pavel Yudin. You were recruited from Volonia during the First Great War. That must mean I'm responsible for demolishing the village you were born in, and your family and relatives. I sincerely hope this is not an act of vengeance.
It's not wasted if I get my revenge here.
He's confronted by Pav, another one of the contestants who is dressed up in a Bremen uniform. Very reminiscent of another one I've seen before. It looks like Pav wants to kill the Kaiser, specifically because the Kaiser destroyed his village and forced Pav's people to conscript into the Bremen army, all in the hunt of creating his own godly power. The Kaiser does a sick anime move and slices Pav into some shish kebab, which then prompts us to get the option of either helping Pav by taking him back to the train, or we can kill him off. Depending on what kind of person you are and what ending you're aiming for, this will differ quite a bit. So after helping him to the train, we can now return back, and instead of going for the tower, I head towards the museum. Inside, there is a party, a masquerade of sorts, and it's filled with people. Shit, even Pocket Cat can be found here. Now, what we want to do in here is figure out a puzzle. I'm not gonna lie, it's a really time-consuming one, but basically, you need to insert the right time into one of the clocks. To do this, you need to talk to a bunch of characters and figure out what time it's supposed to be. Something like 2:35 or 2:35 p.m. This will then open a brand new gateway. Climbing down what feels like an endless ladder, we'll find the entrance to the White Bunker. Arguably the most punishing place in this entire game of Termina. You'll soon learn why. At first, it might seem like this is just yet another military base, though maybe a bit different than before. Little did I know how different it was. See, I run into my first enemy, and without hesitation, this happens. This will instantly end your runs. The Flame Troopers, as they are called, are by far the most dangerous enemies in the entire game. Whereas with the Centaur, you can run away, and other enemies, you can just hopefully win the battle. The thing with these guys is that they can kill you in the overworld. And they're similar to the yellow mages from the first Fear and Hunger. And this is only because they can instantly blast you to death even without going into a battle. So it's important to use the sidestepping and sprint mechanic. And I call it sidestepping because it's just weird sidestepping thing you do. But this movement will allow you to get to the Flame Trooper way faster than he can scorch you. Now, I did this, and during this battle is when I first discovered how the game's Rev Up system works. And no, I'm not talking about Rev K, the YouTuber. And yeah, you guys may have noticed that during these battles, there's this thing called Rev and these strange yellow triangles. Well, I kind of forgot to bring them up earlier when I spoke about combat. And it's because, at first, I didn't even know how this shit worked. Eventually, I did figure out, though, that basically each turn that passes, you gain one yellow Rev Up point. And for each point, whenever it's your turn, the next time you can choose to use 1 to 3 points or all at once. Now, what do these actually do? Well, they can boost your damage or even allow you to attack twice in the same round in case of having, for example, 3 points and using all of them at once. Now, I'll be honest, in my first run, I had totally overlooked this, and it made me struggle so much. I only ever started using these on my later runs, and it was such an oversight on my part. But again, this is what I love about this game. I punished the shit out of myself by not knowing how this system worked from the start. But that is what makes the game so much fun. It's unfair, but also requires you to pay attention if you want it to be fair. You can't just zone out and expect shit to go your way. And I love that the game forces you to think and react and learn more than anything. It's what makes it a challenging and punishing game without being downright impossible to beat. So clearing out each room of the White Bunker is basically just a matter of hoping you don't run into a Flame Trooper. All you gotta do is just kill a bunch of Bremen soldiers, and even running into a strange creature that looks a bit like Crowmauler from Fear and Hunger 1. It's this weird monster that was created by the Kaiser and the Bremen army, and it seems that they have been attempting to play gods themselves by creating their own creatures or monsters. At least that's the indication I got, but there will be more explained about this later. Before we reach the bottom of the White Bunker, we do see loads of instances of gigantic arms and body parts belonging to whatever the Bremen or Eastern Kingdom or whoever has been working on and creating down here, before we ultimately run into my hardest battle so far. The Sylvian Trooper is a woman inside of a tight latex suit, as well as holding a whip in the hand with some bunny ears like a cherry on top. Now, if we don't catch up to the Sylvian Trooper fast enough, she will instead face us together with the platoon. Now, these things appear to almost look like a weaponized version of the human Hydra from the first game. It has a one-shot move, which can only be dodged as long as we hit those fucking coin flips. Or the other way is to dodge it is by basically always guarding as our main playable character. If we guard, it just didn't seem to be able to hit us. This battle took everything out of me, and most of my party had already suffered like crazy. I thought to myself, all right, this is it. We're almost at the end. Just one last push. We are now in the Hall of the Gods. Only one enemy remains in front of us. It's the Kaiser, or the Yellow King. He speaks to us about the Machine God. It seems that his goal was no longer about becoming a god himself or attaining ascension. Rather, his goal seems to have been to defend the new Machine God, to achieve the same that the old gods and new gods did, bringing a new god into reality. No longer simply trying to achieve ascension himself, but rather taking on the task of protecting one. We can face him in battle. Now, I made a mistake here, which almost cost me my run, which was aiming at his arms instead of going for the asterisk, which is this weird object, a little asterisk standing next to him. which is a tiny object hovering by his head. Now, the battle was tough, but by beating him, we finally understood what was going on. The Kaiser, or Legard, had secretly taken control of the nation of Bremen, and using it, had started the Second Great War. Now, using his influence to try to control and get his hands on the project known as Logic. Now, this was a goal by the Eastern Union to create their own machine god, but when a peace treaty had been signed, the Bremen demanded control of Prehevil to be given to them instead. Now, one of the head engineers working on the Logic project was named Rayla Haas, the sister of Olivia Haas. She apparently freaked out because she knew the importance of the project and that if it ended up in the hands of the Bremen, and especially the Kaiser, it could spell the doom of everyone. So, with the help of a paramilitary resistant force, she got access to the White Bunker, and in the midst of everything, she had inserted herself into the machine and become the machine god of Logic, while sending the resistance forces to instead tamper with the telectroscope to make sure the Kaiser wouldn't get access to it fast enough. Speaking of Rayla, she's actually the ghost apparition girl that we've been seeing running around showing us the way whenever we wanted to find the telectroscopes. It's kind of funny because if the moon god Rear didn't fuck around with his Termina festival, it likely would have been that the Kaiser would have gotten here in time instead. But we can enter the last room, the White Womb of Logic. This is the machine god, the god of logic and worldwide information. The battle was not a difficult one, but by the time we got here, I was already so weak from the Kaiser and the platoon that I was terrified of making a single mistake. It just took everything out of me to make sure I didn't lose this. But finally, after beating Logic, we have completed the game's A ending. We have become a part of Logic. This is the best ending, in the sense that this ending is the only one where more than a single person survives. But what are we now? We are part of a single consciousness. We've lost all our individuality. We are but nothing more than a cog in the machine. We are alive, sure, but we are still strung up like, a human wall. Like that one episode from Rick and Morty, actually. And that's the conclusion. That was ending A. But there are two more endings which I didn't aim for. You guys can experience those of your own, but I'll give you just a bit of a quick TLDR on those in case you don't want to play the game yourself.
Alright, so to get the other two endings, you really only have to do one very important thing, and that's to kill all the other contestants, as well as find all the effigies. Now, I will say that killing the other contestants is kind of hard to do, in the sense that they are all over the place, they are in very many different locations, so it does take a while to get to all of them, and second of all, killing them feels a bit wrong. You see, in the first game, killing other people was not really needed. However, in Termina, if you're gonna kill someone, just make sure that nobody's watching. And actually, I kind of made a mistake in the beginning of the game. If you kill any of the contestants right at the train when everybody else is around, they will get angry at you and tie you up and put you in the back of the train. It is kind of funny. But besides that, though, once you've killed everyone, you gotta head to the tower. The same tower where two of my party members got Moonscorched by accident once in the past. Entering the tower, you'll go to the top and face off against Perkele in a battle. You will basically learn here that Perkele overall isn't actually serving the moon god Rear. Instead, he just happened upon the concept of the Termina festival from the past. Instead, he serves something known as the sulfur god, which I'll speak a tiny bit about in a second. So, during this battle, you simply defeat him. And as soon as you've defeated him, the remnants, so just parts of the moon god Rear, will also take you on in battle. Defeating this god, you will have finished the game, but your character will have been basically mentally scarred for the rest of life. And here, depending on what character you play as, you will get different endings. For example, if you played as, in my case, specifically Marco, you will learn that Marco opened up his own gym, specifically to help other people train themselves and get stronger in case they ever end up in a situation similar to his, whether that being dealing with the mafia or dealing with a death festival. And this is where replayability is actually really good, because every other character gets a special ending here that I will not show to you for the sake of spoilers. You guys can experience the different endings on your own. But there is one more ending that's separate from this one, and that is the Sulfur God ending. I already mentioned the Sulfur God a little bit ago about Perkele, because that is who he serves. Well, guess what? In this situation, if you go for the C ending, instead of battling and killing Perkele, you instead join him. And by doing so, you seemingly become the Sulfur God. And that's as much as I understood of this one. You guys can, of course, look into it further, but that's my understanding.
That was ending B. For ending C, it's just about the same, but instead of escaping, you instead join Perkele and become the Sulfur God. Now, I won't bother explaining this because I barely understood it myself, to be honest. I think Termina is a fantastic sequel to the first Fear and Hunger. I think if you compare the first game, I would say it was way harder. Fear and Hunger 1 did have a lot more of a learning curve in terms of everything you did, and it did feel a little bit more difficult to get through, and I struggled far more in the first game than I did with the second game. But I do think the second game has a more well fleshed out story and world. The first game kind of left me hanging and wanting to, have a little bit more information. Of course, you can dive deeper and read all the different books, but on the surface level, there really wasn't much there. I feel like in Termina, there is so much more to each character. Each character has far more story behind them. There's a lot more character and emotion, and you can connect to them in different ways. And because there are 8 characters, there's far more that you can do with them. And I think this is where I found the best parts of the game. Fear and Hunger 2 Termina has so much replayability. You might think that only having 3 endings, that being A, B, and C, might seem like a lot less compared to the first game, but with the inclusion of so many playable characters and special interactions and events, and I think that's what gives it the advantage over the first Fear and Hunger in some sense, because you have an expanded story with so many characters, as well as the addition of the masochism mode, which is the hardest difficulty. Shit, I didn't even mention, there's literally a new version of Crow Mauler. Specifically, it's the Gull Bros. It's these 2 guys who look like seagulls and have seagull heads, which will just walk around and kill you, and they only show up if you play the masochism mode, and they'll show up once you go to the orphanage. So my point is, that's something that I literally didn't even know because I didn't even get to play the masochism mode much because the game is just so difficult. And that's where the beauty lies. I love these games that are difficult but not impossible. And I think this game is even easier than the first one, and due to that, I think it's an easier entry point as well. Sure, you might miss some context for the story, but I still think it's a game that you can just play and have fun with without feeling super confused. And yeah, I think Fear and Hunger 2 Termina is a fantastic sequel to a game that was, frankly speaking, really fucked up, but it was fun, okay? It was fun. That's the biggest, seal of approval I can give this game. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today, guys. Thank you all for watching. This one took a while to put together, so shout out to our only channel member, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you for the next one. I think we're going to the zone. SUOMI number 1!